The number one filling for piroshki and vareniki is, of course, the potato. For years I thought that was just plain wrong. That's like carbs with carbs. I want variety. I want cabbage, mushroom or blueberry fillings, pretty much anything that would create a contrast with the dough. But my family finally convinced me that I was crazy. There is really nothing more comforting than carbs with carbs. I know it's spring, but given the current events, I think we all could use some comfort food right now. At least I can. So today we are making potato piroshki. Let's start with the dough. Melt 40 grams of unsalted butter and let it cool to warm. Combine 100 grams of heavy cream and 220 grams of buttermilk and heat them in a microwave or on the stovetop to somewhere between 100 and 105 Fahrenheit. You want it to feel like a hot tub, but I strongly suggest you use a thermometer so that you don't damage your yeast. Pour in 10 grams of SAF instant yeast. Whisk very thoroughly until the yeast is completely dissolved. See? No lumps. If it's still clumping up, let it sit for a few minutes and whisk again. Set the cup back on the scale and zero it out. Add 2 yolks. If they don't quite add up to 36 grams, add a splash of buttermilk until you get 36 grams. Add the melted butter and whisk. It's okay if your yolks are from the fridge, the other ingredients will warm them up. Put 450 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour into a bowl of a stand mixer. I'm using King Arthur brand. 8.4 grams of salt, that's 1 tablespoon of diamond crystal kosher salt or 1.5 teaspoons of table salt. For all other salt types, weigh on a high precision scale. Add 40 grams of granulated sugar and whisk the dry ingredients to combine. Pour the wet into the dry and mix with a dough hook on low speed until you get a dough. If you don't have a mixer, I already have a video on how to make this dough by hand. Look for a link below. Once all the flour is absorbed, scrape down the sides of the bowl and mix on medium-low speed, about 3 on a KitchenAid, for 4 minutes. This is a very wet dough, so it's perfectly normal for it to stick to the bowl. If your mixer has a C-hook instead of a spiral hook, flip the dough halfway through to ensure even kneading. Get the dough out onto a lightly floured surface. Grease a bowl that is at least 3 quarts in capacity with oil all the way up the sides. Give the dough a few folds to turn it into a ball and place it smooth side up into the bowl. Cover with plastic and let rise until it's roughly tripled in volume. This will take about 2 hours, assuming your kitchen is roughly 70 Fahrenheit. While our dough is rising, let's make the filling. Dice 1 or 2 yellow onions, depending on their size. Mine are kind of small today, so I am doing 2. Set a 10-inch skillet over medium heat and add 2 tablespoons of butter and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Add the onions, a generous pinch of salt, and cook, stirring occasionally. Regulate the heat so that the onions brown very slowly, giving them a chance to become completely translucent and tender. This will take about 20 minutes. There is no need to stir them constantly. I've only stirred them 5 or 6 times during 20 minutes. Here's what they should look like when they are done. While the onions are cooking, peel 2 pounds of Yukon Gold potatoes. If you don't have Yukon Gold, any boiling potato will work. Cut the potatoes into big chunks, put in the pot, and cover with cold water. Bring to a boil, uncover, reduce the heat so that the water is simmering very gently, and add a lot of salt. I know you're shocked, but most of the salt stays in the water. In order for potatoes to taste seasoned, the water should taste saltier than you'd be comfortable drinking. Cook for about 20 minutes or until a dull knife goes through potatoes easily. You want the potatoes to be soft enough to slide right off the knife. Drain in a colander, return the potatoes to the pot, set it over medium heat, and let all the remaining moisture evaporate. This is very important to avoid grainy texture. Periodically, rearrange the potatoes in the pot and regulate the heat so that the bottom of the pot isn't burning. After about 4 minutes, the potatoes should look covered in a light colored fluff and leave a residue on the bottom of the pot. This is a sign that you dried off most of the moisture and can proceed to mashing. Add 5 tablespoons of butter and black pepper to taste. And mash. Alternatively, you can rice the potatoes and then add the butter, but for this dish, a masher works just fine and it's easier to wash. Stir in 60 grams of grated cheddar. You want one that's nicely aged and crumbly. I'm using Cabot Extra Sharp. Farmer's cheese would be a more traditional addition, but I find that any tangy cheese works well. Once the cheese is melted, stir in those gorgeous golden onions. I'm intentionally leaving out cream or milk to end up with thicker potatoes. This consistency works better in fillings. Taste and adjust for salt. The hardest part of this dish for me is not to eat this entire pot of potatoes on the spot. Cool the potatoes completely before using. If you want to speed it up, spread them out on a baking sheet and put in the fridge. If it's more convenient, you can make the filling a day in advance and keep it in the fridge. It's been about 2 hours and our dough is huge and bubbly. Let's preheat the oven to 400 degrees and start shaping. Lightly flour the work surface. Release the dough from the sides of the bowl and turn it out. We want to remove as many bubbles as possible. To do that, first pat the dough aggressively with flat hands. Then fold it like a letter, this way. And finally fold it again like a letter, the other way. The next step is portioning. Let's divide the dough into 40-gram pieces. Don't feel like you have to guess right on the first try. You can add or subtract the dough as needed. Once all the dough is portioned, roll each piece into a tight ball. Tuck in all the ends, flip it over, and roll, pressing hard with the palm of your hand. I prefer not to flour the work surface at all, otherwise the dough ends up sliding around and the balls become very hard to form. Keep all the pieces covered at all times unless you're working with them. This dough can dry out very quickly. Working with one ball at a time, place it smooth side down onto your work surface and flatten it out with your fingers. I don't use any flour for this. Letting the dough stick to the counter helps it stay thin instead of shrinking back. But if your humidity conditions are different and this is not working for you, you can always add a little flour on your work surface. My circle is about 5 inches in diameter. Add a dollop of potatoes. I chilled my filling so that it's easy to mold. I like my piroshki filled very generously, so my piles of potatoes are 45 grams each. If you have any potatoes on your hands, wipe them off. Bring all the edges to the center. Pinch them really tightly until the dough becomes one. Place piroshki seam side down on a parchment paper lined baking sheet. You'll end up with 2 sheets of 10 buns. As soon as you fill the first sheet, cover it with plastic wrap and set a timer for 20 minutes. By the time you finish shaping the second batch of 10, the first sheet will be ready to bake. Combine 1 yolk with 2 tablespoons of milk and whisk thoroughly. Brush this egg wash over piroshki. Place them in the middle of the oven for 10 minutes. Rotate the baking sheet and bake for another 5 to 7 minutes or until they are nicely browned. If you are using a convection fan, expect a slightly shorter baking time. As soon as they're out, brush them with melted butter. Since I don't want to dirty another pastry brush and bowl, I'll just run a stick of butter all over them. Egg wash and bake the second batch. Give them 10 minutes to cool and enjoy. Make sure to serve them hot. Cold mashed potatoes don't taste good. Pirozhki reheat beautifully, so there is no need to make them right before serving. If you want to serve them over the next couple of days, cool them completely, put into an airtight container and refrigerate. Then wrap them tightly in foil in a single layer and bake at 350 Fahrenheit for about 15 minutes or until hot inside. To rewarm on the stove top, you can melt a little butter in a pan, set it over fairly low heat, add your pirozhki, cover the pan and cook for 5 minutes on each side. They'll come out slightly crispy but still very tasty. Yes, you can. After you deflate your dough and give it 2 ladder turns, put it back into an oiled bowl, cover tightly with plastic and refrigerate overnight. Proceed straight to the portioning and shaping step. There is no need to return the dough to room temperature. The bottom of your pirozhki should be nicely browned but not burnt. If it's coming out too dark, you might need to use lighter baking sheets. Darker baking sheets brown faster than light ones. If all your baking sheets are well seasoned, put another baking sheet underneath to insulate the bottom, or try putting a piece of foil on a rack under your baking sheet to reflect some of the heat. Since the dough grows but the filling doesn't, you will inevitably end up with a gap above the filling. Pirozhki is something you bite, not something you cut in half for the thumbnail. When you bite them, you don't notice the gap at all. Mine have a gap too. Like all resourceful YouTubers, I solved this problem by stuffing some leftover mashed potatoes into this guy after baking so that I could make it look good for the thumbnail. If yours don't look like this inside, don't worry, mine don't either. Here are more culinary tutorials for you to check out, and if you are ever in the Boston area, maybe I'll see you in one of my classes.